Have you ever noticed how the things you grip most tightly are often the very things causing you the most pain? Right now, as you're listening to this, you're probably carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you anymore. Old resentments that have outlived their usefulness, expectations that are crushing your spirit, relationships that ended years ago but still occupy space in your mind, versions of yourself that you've outgrown but can't seem to shed. You're walking through life with invisible anchors attached to your ankles, wondering why forward movement feels so impossibly difficult. But here's the truth that will change everything once you truly grasp it. You don't have to carry any of it, not one single piece. The weight you're bearing isn't a burden you're destined to shoulder forever. It's a choice you're making every single day, often without even realizing it. And the moment you understand that holding on is a choice, you suddenly discover that release is also a choice. The most successful, peaceful, and fulfilled people you've ever encountered haven't mastered the art of acquiring more or achieving more. They've mastered something far more powerful: the art of release. They know what to keep and what to let go. They understand that every moment spent gripping yesterday is a moment stolen from today. They've discovered that freedom isn't found in gaining control over everything. It's found in releasing the need to control anything. And today, you're going to learn exactly how to access this transformative power of release in every area of your life. Chapter 1: The Illusion of Control. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control things that were never theirs to control in the first place. They exhaust themselves attempting to manage other people's opinions, guarantee specific outcomes, prevent all possible pain, and ensure that life unfolds according to their carefully constructed plans. This quest for control feels responsible, mature, and necessary, but it's actually the primary source of human suffering. Because here's what nobody wants to admit: you control far less than you think you do, and the things you actually can control, you're probably neglecting while you're busy trying to control the uncontrollable. Think about your day-to-day experience. How much energy do you spend trying to control what other people think of you? You carefully craft your image, manage your words, curate your social media presence, and obsess over how you're being perceived. But the truth is, you have no control over what happens in someone else's mind. They're going to think whatever their own conditioning, biases, and projections lead them to think. You could be absolutely perfect, and some people would still find fault. You could be genuinely flawed, and others would still see only your strengths. Their perception has far more to do with who they are than who you are. How much time do you waste trying to control outcomes that depend on countless variables beyond your influence? You create elaborate plans, develop contingencies for every possibility, and believe that if you just think through everything carefully enough, you can guarantee success. But life is fundamentally uncertain. Markets shift. People change their minds. Unexpected obstacles appear. Lucky breaks happen for seemingly no reason. You can do everything right and still not get the result you wanted. You can do everything wrong and somehow succeed anyway. The relationship between your effort and your outcomes is far less direct than you've been led to believe. The obsession with control typically begins in childhood, when you experience something painful and decided, consciously or unconsciously, that the way to prevent future pain was to control your environment more effectively. Maybe your parents divorced and you concluded that you needed to be perfect to keep people from leaving. Maybe you experienced chaos and decided that rigid structure was the only path to safety. Maybe you were hurt by someone's unexpected behavior and determined that if you could just predict and manage everyone around you, you'd never be surprised by pain again. These control strategies made sense at the time. They were your best attempt to create safety in a world that felt dangerous and unpredictable. But control strategies that may have helped you survive childhood become prison walls in adulthood. The perfectionism that protected you from criticism now prevents you from taking risks or enjoying your achievements. The hypervigilance that helped you navigate an unstable home now keeps you from relaxing into healthy relationships. The rigid planning that created structure and chaos now makes you inflexible and unable to adapt when life doesn't follow your script. What once served you is now suffocating you, and the worst part is, you probably don't even realize it. The control feels like wisdom, like responsible adulting, like the mature way to handle life, but it's actually a trauma response that's outlived its usefulness. Dr. Stephen Hayes, the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy, has spent decades researching what actually creates psychological flexibility and well-being. His findings are clear. The more you try to control your internal experience, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, the more you suffer. It's called experiential avoidance, and it's one of the most powerful predictors of psychological distress. When you can't tolerate uncomfortable emotions, you end up organizing your entire life around avoiding them. You don't pursue relationships because you can't tolerate the possibility of rejection. You don't take career risks because you can't handle the feeling of uncertainty. You don't express yourself authentically because you can't bear the discomfort of potential criticism. This avoidance seems protective, but it actually makes you more vulnerable. Because the emotions you're trying to avoid don't disappear. They accumulate. They intensify. They start controlling your behavior in increasingly limiting ways. You become a prisoner of your own avoidance strategies, living a smaller and smaller life in an attempt to feel safe from discomfort that's actually unavoidable. The irony is profound. In trying to control your emotional experience, you lose control of your life. Your decisions are dictated by fear rather than desire, by avoidance rather than aspiration, by what you're running from rather than what you're running toward. But there's another dimension to the control problem that's even more insidious. Most people are trying to control things that have already happened. They replay past conversations, reimagining what they should have said. They ruminate on past mistakes, trying to mentally undo them. They rehearse old arguments, attempting to win them retroactively in their minds. They review past relationships, analyzing what went wrong and how it could have been different. This mental time travel creates the illusion that you're doing something productive, learning from the past, or preventing future mistakes. But you're not. You're just draining your present moment energy trying to change a past that's already fixed. The past is the one thing in existence that's completely unchangeable. Every moment that's already occurred is now permanent, immutable, set in stone. You can change your interpretation of it. You can change how you respond to it going forward, but you cannot change what actually happened. Yet people spend hours, days, years trying to do exactly that through obsessive thinking, as if enough mental review will somehow alter historical events. This is control seeking its most futile form, and it's exhausting countless people who wonder why they can't seem to move forward. Real power, the kind that actually affects your life quality, isn't found in controlling external circumstances, other people, or even your own thoughts and feelings. It's found in releasing the need for that control and focusing instead on the one thing you genuinely can influence: your response, your choices, your attention, your interpretation, your actions in this present moment. When you stop wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable and redirect that energy toward what you actually can affect, everything changes. You're no longer fighting reality. You're working with it. You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to force life into a shape it refuses to take. You're dancing with what actually is. This shift from control to responsibility is the first and most fundamental aspect of the power of release. You release the illusion that you're supposed to be managing everything, and you discover the freedom that comes from focusing your energy where it can actually make a difference. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on influencing your life. It means becoming strategic about where you invest your limited energy, attention, and effort. It means distinguishing between what you can change and what you can't, and having the wisdom to know the difference, as the Serenity Prayer so perfectly articulates. The moment you truly release the need to control what isn't yours to control, you experience something remarkable: a lightness, a spaciousness, an ease that comes from no longer fighting constant battles against reality. You're not trying to make people be different than they are. You're not demanding that life follow your plan. You're not insisting that your emotions conform to what you think you should feel. You're simply present with what is, responding as skillfully as you can, and releasing attachment to outcomes that depend on factors beyond your influence. This is where real power lives, not in control, but in conscious release of the need for it. Chapter 2. The weight of unprocessed emotions. Your emotional body is like a physical body in one crucial way. What goes in must come out. When you eat food, your body processes it and eliminates what it doesn't need. When you experience emotions, your system is designed to feel them, process them, and release them. But most people have learned to interrupt this natural cycle. They suppress, avoid, distract, or numb themselves rather than allowing emotions to complete their natural course. The result is emotional constipation, a buildup of unprocessed feelings that creates symptoms ranging from anxiety and depression to physical illness and chronic pain. Think about the last time you felt genuinely angry. Not irritated or frustrated, but deeply, viscerally angry. Did you allow yourself to feel it fully? Did you give it space to move through your body, to be expressed appropriately, to complete its natural cycle? Or did you immediately try to calm yourself down, rationalize it away, distract yourself, or suppress it because anger wasn't acceptable or convenient? Most people do the latter. They've been taught that certain emotions are bad, dangerous, or signs of weakness. So they push them down, talk themselves out of them, or redirect their attention to avoid feeling them fully. But emotions aren't problems to be solved or enemies to be defeated. They're information. They're energy moving through your system. They're your psyche's way of communicating about your needs, your boundaries, your values, and your relationship to your environment. When you consistently refuse to receive this information, when you interrupt the emotional processing system, you create a backlog. Those unfelt feelings don't disappear. They get stored in your body, your nervous system, your unconscious mind, and they accumulate, creating increasingly intense symptoms as your system tries desperately to get your attention. Dr. Candace Pert's groundbreaking research on the biochemistry of emotion revealed that emotions aren't just psychological experiences. They're physiological events involving complex cascades of neuropeptides and receptors throughout your entire body. When you experience an emotion, your body produces specific chemicals that need to be metabolized and cleared from your system. When you suppress the emotion, you interrupt this metabolic process. The chemicals remain in your tissues, creating chronic states of activation or depression that your body was never designed to maintain long term. This is why people who chronically suppress emotions often develop physical symptoms that have no clear medical cause. The unfelt anger becomes tension in the jaw and shoulders. The unexpressed grief becomes a heaviness in the chest. The unacknowledged fear becomes a knot in the stomach. Your body is trying to complete the emotional processing that your mind is refusing to allow. It's speaking in the only language available to it when you won't listen to emotional communication, physical sensation, and symptom. The cultural conditioning around emotions is deeply problematic. From early childhood, most people learn that certain feelings are acceptable and others are not. Happiness is good. Anger is bad. Excitement is okay. Sadness is weakness. This creates an impossible situation where you're expected to only experience a narrow range of emotions while somehow remaining psychologically healthy. But humans aren't designed to selectively feel. When you numb or suppress the emotions you've labeled as negative, you inevitably dampen your capacity to feel the positive ones as well. You can't selectively numb. You either feel or you don't. This is why so many people report feeling emotionally flat, disconnected, or numb, even when objectively good things are happening in their lives. They've become so skilled at suppressing unwanted emotions that they've suppressed their emotional capacity altogether. They're going through life in a kind of emotional muting, able to think about feelings but not actually experience them fully. They can tell you they should be happy or grateful, but they can't access the actual feeling. The suppression that was meant to protect them from pain has also locked them out of joy. Releasing unprocessed emotions isn't about dramatic catharsis or endless emotional expression. It's about creating space to feel what's present without judgment, resistance, or the need to make it different. This is harder than it sounds because most people have such a conflicted relationship with their emotional experience. They think feeling sad means they're depressed. They worry that feeling angry means they're a bad person. They fear that acknowledging anxiety will make it worse. So they avoid, distract, rationalize, and suppress, creating exactly the problems they're trying to prevent. The practice of emotional release begins with something simple but profound: permission. You give yourself permission to feel whatever is actually present without immediately trying to fix it, understand it, or make it go away. You might notice tightness in your chest, and instead of immediately deep breathing it away or distracting yourself, you simply acknowledge it. There's tightness in my chest. You might feel a wave of sadness, and instead of talking yourself out of it or judging yourself for feeling it, you allow it. I'm feeling sad right now. This sounds trivially simple, but for most people, it's revolutionary. When you give emotions permission to be present without resistance, something remarkable happens. They move, they shift, they complete their natural cycle and dissolve on their own. Emotions are temporary by nature. They arise, peak, and pass, usually within minutes, if you don't interrupt the process. But when you resist them, when you layer story and judgment and avoidance on top of the raw feeling, you can stay stuck in an emotional state for hours, days, or even years. The emotion itself might last 3 minutes. Your resistance to it can last a lifetime. Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, a neuroscientist who studied her own stroke recovery, discovered that the physiological lifespan of an emotion is about 90 seconds. When you feel an emotion without adding story or resistance, it moves through your system in a minute and a half and completes. But most people never experience this natural completion because they immediately start thinking about the emotion, creating narratives about what it means, judging themselves for having it, or trying to make it stop. This thinking process regenerates the emotional response, creating a loop that can persist indefinitely. Learning to release unprocessed emotions requires developing what therapists call distress tolerance. This is your capacity to experience uncomfortable emotions without immediately acting to eliminate them. For most people, the moment discomfort arises, they reach for their phone, turn on the TV, eat something, drink something, call someone, anything to avoid sitting with the feeling. But this constant avoidance prevents emotional processing and creates dependency on external sources of regulation. You never develop confidence in your ability to handle difficult feelings because you never actually practice handling them. Building distress tolerance is like building physical strength. You start small and gradually increase your capacity. You might begin by allowing yourself to feel mild discomfort for 30 seconds without distraction, then a minute, then 5 minutes. You learn through direct experience that uncomfortable emotions aren't dangerous, that they don't last forever, and that you're capable of experiencing them without falling apart. This builds a kind of emotional resilience that's impossible to develop through avoidance. The release of unprocessed emotions also requires understanding the difference between feeling your feelings and wallowing in them. Feeling is present moment somatic experience. You notice the sensations in your body. You allow the emotion to move through. You stay with the actual experience rather than the story about it. Wallowing is repetitive, thinking about the emotion, rehearsing the narrative that created it, identifying with it as who you are rather than something you're temporarily experiencing. Feeling releases. Wallowing reinforces. Many people resist feeling their emotions because they fear they'll be overwhelmed, that if they start crying, they'll never stop, or if they allow anger, they'll become violent. But these fears are usually based on the intensity that's built up from years of suppression, not on what would happen if they processed emotions regularly. When you allow emotions to flow naturally as they arise, they're manageable. It's only when you've been damming them up for years that the pressure becomes intense. The solution isn't more suppression. It's gradual, safe release. Chapter 3. Releasing Toxic Relationships. One of the heaviest weights most people carry is relationships that have become toxic, draining, or misaligned with who they're becoming. These might be friendships that were genuine once, but have devolved into obligation. Romantic partnerships that died years ago, but continue through momentum and fear. Family relationships where you're still playing roles that don't fit anymore. Professional connections that drain your energy without providing genuine value. Every one of these relationships is costing you, taking energy, time, and attention that could be invested in connections that actually nourish you. But releasing relationships is complicated in ways that releasing other things isn't. Relationships involve other people who have their own needs, expectations, and reactions. They often come with histories, shared memories, and mutual connections that make clean breaks difficult. They're intertwined with your identity, your sense of loyalty, and your fear of being alone. And they're governed by powerful cultural narratives about what you owe people, how long you should try to make things work, and what constitutes a good enough reason to end a connection. The first step in releasing toxic relationships is getting honest about what you're actually experiencing versus what you think you should be experiencing. Many people stay in relationships that are clearly damaging because they believe they should feel differently than they do. They think they should be more patient, more forgiving, more willing to work on things. They judge their authentic response as flawed, rather than recognizing it as valuable information about the actual state of the relationship. But your emotional and somatic response to someone is data. If you consistently feel drained after spending time with them, that's information. If you find yourself walking on eggshells, constantly managing your expression to avoid their reactions, that's information. If you feel relief when plans get canceled rather than disappointment, that's information. Toxic relationships come in many forms, but they share common characteristics. There's typically an imbalance where one person is consistently giving more than they're receiving. There's often a dynamic where your needs, feelings, or preferences are regularly dismissed, minimized, or made wrong. There may be patterns of manipulation, guilt tripping, or emotional coercion where you're made to feel responsible for the other person's emotional state. There's usually a quality of walking on eggshells where you're constantly monitoring and adjusting yourself to prevent conflict or negative reactions. One of the most common toxic patterns is the relationship built on who someone used to be, or who you hope they'll become, rather than who they actually are right now. You might stay connected to someone because you remember how close you were in college, even though you have nothing in common anymore. You might remain in a romantic relationship because you can see their potential, even though they consistently show you through their actions that they're not interested in actualizing that potential. You might maintain a friendship because you believe they'll change if you just support them enough, even though they've demonstrated the same destructive patterns for years. This attachment to past versions or future possibilities rather than present reality is a form of denial that prevents you from making clear decisions. The person you're in relationship with isn't who they were 5 years ago or who they might become someday. They're who they are right now, today, as evidenced by their consistent behavior patterns. When you make relationship decisions based on past or future versions of people, you're essentially in relationship with your imagination rather than with an actual human being. Releasing relationships that no longer serve you isn't cruelty. It's honesty. It's acknowledging that people grow, change, and sometimes grow in different directions. It's recognizing that what worked at one stage of life may not work at another. It's accepting that some relationships have natural lifespans, and trying to force them to continue beyond their organic endpoint creates suffering for everyone involved. The person you're forcing yourself to stay connected with can feel your lack of genuine desire to be in relationship. Your withdrawal and resentment are palpable even if you never speak them directly. One of the most challenging aspects of releasing relationships is dealing with the guilt. You've been taught that good people don't give up on relationships, that loyalty means staying regardless of cost, that real friends or family members stick together through anything. But this is a toxic narrative that keeps people trapped in situations that damage their well-being. True loyalty isn't blind allegiance, regardless of how you're treated. It's honoring your commitments while also honoring yourself. And sometimes, honoring yourself means acknowledging that a relationship is no longer healthy and making the difficult choice to step away. The process of releasing a toxic relationship begins with getting clear about your boundaries and what you will and won't accept in relationships. Many people have never actually identified their relationship boundaries. They've been so focused on being nice, accommodating, and maintaining connection that they've never asked themselves what they actually need to feel safe, respected, and nourished in relationship. Without clear boundaries, you end up accepting treatment that slowly erodes your sense of self-worth and well-being. Once you're clear about your boundaries, you can communicate them clearly and compassionately. This isn't about attacking the other person or making them wrong. It's about owning your needs and the conditions under which you're available for relationship. You might say something like, "I need relationships where there's reciprocity and where my feelings are respected. I've noticed that our dynamic doesn't include these elements, and I need to create some distance." This is honest without being cruel, clear without being aggressive. How people respond to your boundaries tells you everything you need to know about whether the relationship can evolve or needs to end. People who genuinely care about you and are capable of healthy relationship will usually try to understand your boundaries and work with them, even if they're initially surprised or disappointed. People who are invested in keeping you in a role that serves them, but not. You will typically respond to boundaries with guilt-tripping, manipulation, anger, or dismissal. They'll tell you you're being too sensitive, that you're overreacting, that you're abandoning them, that you're selfish. These responses confirm that the relationship is indeed toxic, and that release is the healthy choice. Some relationships can't be fully released due to practical constraints. You may need to maintain contact with a toxic family member for extended family harmony or because of shared responsibilities. You may need to work with someone whose behavior is problematic. In these cases, release takes a different form. You release your expectation that the relationship will be what you wish it were. You release your emotional investment in changing them or getting them to see your perspective. You maintain functional contact while withdrawing your deeper emotional engagement. You interact from a boundaried place rather than from hope or need. This bounded engagement is different from the people-pleasing pseudo-connection that many people mistake for relationship. You're not pretending everything is fine. You're being cordial while protecting your energy. You're fulfilling necessary obligations without opening yourself to the person emotionally. You're relating to them as they actually are, rather than as you wish they were. This requires emotional maturity and often feels uncomfortable because it means accepting limitation where you wanted depth. But it's far more honest and less draining than the alternative of constant disappointment and hurt. Chapter 4. The Prison of Perfectionism. Perfectionism masquerades as a virtue in a culture that celebrates excellence and achievement. But make no mistake, perfectionism isn't about striving for excellence or having high standards. It's a fear-based pattern that prevents you from fully engaging with life because you're terrified of being seen as flawed, inadequate, or less than. It's the voice that tells you nothing you do is ever good enough, that paralyzes you before you even begin because the outcome might not be perfect. That turns every endeavor into a test of your fundamental worth as a human being. The weight of perfectionism is exhausting because it's a game you can never win. The standards keep shifting. The goalpost keeps moving. No matter what you achieve, it's never quite enough because there's always someone doing it better. Always some way you could have done it differently. Always some flaw that undermines the entire effort. You live in a constant state of striving and falling short, of achieving and immediately dismissing your achievements as not impressive enough, of driving yourself relentlessly while never allowing yourself to rest in satisfaction. Dr. Brené Brown's research on shame and vulnerability reveals that perfectionism is actually a shield, a 20-ton shield that you carry around thinking it will protect you from judgment, criticism, and rejection. But the shield is so heavy that it crushes you long before anyone else ever gets close enough to hurt you. Perfectionism doesn't protect you from shame. It's actually a form of shame, a core belief that you're not good enough as you are, and that you must perform flawlessly to earn your place in the world. This belief typically forms in childhood when love, approval, or safety felt conditional on your performance. Maybe you had parents who only showed pride when you excelled, creating the unconscious equation that your worth equals your achievements. Maybe you had critical caregivers who focused on what you did wrong rather than what you did right, teaching you that nothing you do will ever be satisfactory. Maybe you grew up in an environment where mistakes were punished harshly, creating a terror of being less than perfect. Or maybe you internalized cultural messages that your value as a person is determined by your productivity, appearance, or accomplishments. Whatever the origin, perfectionism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You set impossibly high standards, inevitably fall short because the standards are unrealistic, then use that falling short as evidence that you're indeed not good enough, which reinforces the need to be even more perfect next time. It's a vicious cycle that generates constant anxiety, chronic dissatisfaction, and a life that feels more like a performance than an authentic experience. The prison of perfectionism also severely limits your willingness to take risks, try new things, or show your work before it's completely polished. If your worth is riding on everything you do being flawless, you can't afford to be a beginner at anything. You can't experiment, fail, or learn through trial and error, because failure feels like a fundamental statement about your inadequacy rather than a normal part of growth. So you stay in your lane, doing only what you already know you're good at, depriving yourself of the joy of learning and the satisfaction of genuine challenge. Perfectionism also destroys your capacity for creativity, because creativity requires making things that might not work, expressing ideas that might be criticized, and putting yourself out there before you have everything figured out. The perfectionist sits in endless preparation, researching and planning and refining, but never actually creating, because the creation might be imperfect. Or they create, but never share, because no matter how much they work on something, it never feels quite ready for public consumption. Their perfectionism becomes a cage that keeps their gifts locked away from the world that needs them. Perhaps most damaging, perfectionism ruins your relationships because it's impossible to be authentic with other people when you're constantly trying to appear flawless. You can't be vulnerable about your struggles because that would reveal weakness. You can't ask for help because that would demonstrate inadequacy. You can't admit mistakes because that would confirm your deepest fear that you're not good enough. So you perform a version of yourself that seems to have it all together while feeling desperately alone because no one knows the real you behind the perfect facade. Releasing perfectionism begins with understanding that it's not serving you. This sounds obvious, but many perfectionists are deeply attached to their perfectionism. They believe it's what makes them successful, what keeps them motivated, what prevents them from becoming lazy or mediocre. They fear that without their harsh inner critic driving them relentlessly, they'd accomplish nothing. But research consistently shows that perfectionism actually undermines performance. The anxiety it creates interferes with focus and creativity. The fear of failure prevents the risk-taking necessary for innovation. The harsh self-criticism erodes confidence and motivation over time. The alternative to perfectionism isn't mediocrity or not caring about quality. It's what researchers call healthy striving or excellence seeking. This is when you have high standards and work diligently to meet them, but your worth isn't riding on the outcome. You can strive for excellence while accepting that you're human and will sometimes fall short. You can care about quality while also caring about your well-being. You can want to do good work while recognizing that your value as a person isn't determined by your performance. One of the most powerful practices for releasing perfectionism is learning to separate your performance from your worth. Your worth is inherent. It's not something you earn through achievement or lose through failure. You matter because you exist, not because of what you produce or accomplish. When you truly internalize this, it transforms your relationship to everything you do. You can still care about doing things well, but it's no longer a life or death situation. A mistake doesn't mean you're worthless. A failure doesn't mean you're inadequate. An imperfect outcome doesn't mean you're unlovable. Another crucial practice is deliberately doing things imperfectly. This sounds counterintuitive, but it's incredibly liberating. You intentionally turn in work that's good enough rather than perfect. You share creative projects before you think they're ready. You let people see you struggling or making mistakes. Each time you do this and survive, you prove to your nervous system that imperfection isn't actually dangerous. You won't die from making a mistake. People won't abandon you for being human. The catastrophe you've been guarding against by being perfect doesn't actually materialize when you're imperfect. Releasing perfectionism also requires developing self-compassion, which means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you'd offer a good friend who was struggling. When you make a mistake, instead of harsh self-criticism, you might say to yourself, "This is hard. I'm doing my best. Everyone makes mistakes. This doesn't mean anything about my fundamental worth." This sounds simple, but for most perfectionists, it's revolutionary. They've spent their entire lives believing that harsh self-criticism is necessary for motivation, when actually, self-compassion is far more effective at promoting growth and change. Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion shows that people who are kind to themselves when they fail are actually more motivated to improve and less likely to give up than people who are self-critical. Self-compassion doesn't make you complacent. It gives you the emotional safety to acknowledge your shortcomings honestly and work on them without the paralyzing shame that perfectionism generates. When you're not terrified of seeing your flaws, you can actually address them effectively. The journey from perfectionism to healthy striving is gradual. You don't just decide to stop being a perfectionist and instantly transform. You catch yourself in perfectionistic thinking and gently redirect. You notice when you're setting impossible standards and consciously adjust to something more realistic. You practice being imperfect in small, safe ways and gradually build your tolerance for it. You surround yourself with people who accept you as you are, rather than people who reinforce the belief that you must be perfect to be acceptable. As you release the crushing weight of perfectionism, you discover something beautiful. Life becomes actually enjoyable, rather than just a series of tests you're trying to pass. You can relax into experiences rather than constantly evaluating your performance. You can try new things for the joy of learning rather than only doing what you already know you're good at. You can share yourself authentically rather than always performing a polished version. You can be human, gloriously imperfect, beautifully flawed, and completely worthy exactly as you are. Chapter 5. Letting go of who you're not. One of the most profound forms of release involves letting go of identities that were never truly yours to begin with. Most people are walking around wearing identity labels that were assigned to them by family, culture, or circumstance rather than chosen authentically. These false identities shape how you see yourself, what you believe you're capable of, what you allow yourself to want, and how you show up in the world. And they're often so deeply embedded that you don't even realize they're not actually you. You've been performing a role for so long that you've forgotten you're acting. Think about the identity stories you carry. I'm not creative. I'm bad with money. I'm the responsible one. I'm not a people person. I'm naturally anxious. I'm not leadership material. I'm the funny one. I'm not athletic. These identity statements feel like facts about who you fundamentally are, but they're not facts. They're interpretations, conclusions you drew based on limited experiences, messages you internalized from others, or roles you adopted to fit into your family system. And they're limiting you in ways you can't even see, because you can't pursue possibilities that contradict your identity. Family systems often assign roles to children to maintain family balance. There's the responsible one who takes care of everyone, the rebel who acts out the family's unexpressed anger, the hero who achieves to make the family look good, the scapegoat who carries the family's dysfunction, the lost child who stays invisible to avoid adding to family stress. These roles serve a function in the family system, but they become prisons when you carry them into adulthood. You're still playing a part that your family needed you to play, but that has nothing to do with who you actually are or could become. Cultural identities also shape you in profound ways, often invisible to you because they're so embedded in the water you swim in. Your gender, ethnicity, nationality, religion, and socioeconomic background all come with prescribed identities, expectations about how you should be, what you should want, what's possible for someone like you. These cultural identities can provide meaningful connection and belonging, but they can also limit you when you internalize messages about what people like you can't do, shouldn't want, or aren't capable of. Personal history creates identity too. You might identify as someone who was hurt, rejected, or traumatized, someone who failed, someone who succeeded, someone who was chosen, or someone who was left behind. These historical identities keep you anchored to the past, relating to your present through the lens of what happened years or decades ago. You're not actually living in the present. You're living in a story about the past that you keep projecting onto the present, which prevents you from experiencing what's actually happening now. The challenge with false identities is that they become self-fulfilling prophecies. If you identify as not creative, you won't engage in creative activities, which means you never develop creative skills, which confirms your identity as not creative. If you identify as bad with money, you won't learn about financial management, which means you continue to struggle financially, which confirms your identity. If you identify as not a people person, you'll avoid social situations, which means you never develop social skills or form meaningful connections, which confirms that you're not a people person. The identity creates the behavior that creates the results that confirm the identity. Releasing false identities begins with questioning them. When you hear yourself make an identity statement, ask, is this actually true? Or is this just a story I've been telling myself? Where did this identity come from? What evidence do I have for it? What evidence contradicts it? Who would I be without this identity? What becomes possible if this identity isn't fixed? These questions create cracks in the identity structure, opening space for different possibilities to emerge. Often you'll discover that your identity is based on a very small sample size. You decided you're not athletic based on being picked last for teams in elementary school. You concluded you're not creative because a teacher criticized your artwork once. You determined you're bad with relationships because of one or two painful breakups. You're treating a few data points as definitive proof of your permanent nature when they're actually just individual experiences that don't determine your potential. Another powerful practice is conducting behavioral experiments that directly challenge your identity. If you identify as not creative, you might take a creative class and discover you actually enjoy it and have aptitude you never knew existed. If you identify as naturally anxious, you might practice anxiety reduction techniques and discover that your anxiety is actually responsive to intervention rather than a fixed trait. If you identify as not good with people, you might push yourself to engage socially and discover that your natural social awkwardness was actually just lack of practice and could be developed like any other skill. These experiments are often uncomfortable because they require doing things that contradict your sense of self. Your identity, even a limiting one, provides a kind of comfort through predictability. You know who you are, what you're capable of, what to expect from yourself. Challenging that identity creates uncertainty and the possibility of being disappointed or discovering that you invested years in a limitation that wasn't actually real. But this discomfort is the price of freedom. You can stay comfortable in your familiar limitations, or you can risk discomfort to discover what's actually possible for you. Releasing identity also means recognizing that you're not your thoughts, emotions, personality traits, history, or body. These are all aspects of your experience, but they're not the fundamental you. Beneath all these layers of identity is awareness itself, the consciousness that observes all your experiences without being limited by any of them. When you identify with this awareness, rather than with any particular content of consciousness, you become infinitely flexible. You can have anxious thoughts without being an anxious person. You can experience failure without being a failure. You can have a history of hurt without being damaged goods. This shift from content to awareness is what spiritual traditions point to when they talk about awakening or enlightenment. It's not about having perfect thoughts or ideal emotions. It's about recognizing that you're the space in which all thoughts and emotions arise, which means you're not imprisoned by any of them. A thought of inadequacy can arise and pass without defining you. An emotion of fear can be present without controlling you. A memory of pain can exist without determining your future. You become fluid rather than fixed, responsive rather than reactive, free rather than imprisoned by identity. As you release false identities, you might go through a period of confusion or emptiness. If you're not the person you thought you were, then who are you? This identity limbo can be unsettling, but it's actually a necessary stage in discovering your authentic self. You can't know who you really are until you stop being who you're not. The emptiness isn't a problem to be filled immediately with a new identity. It's the fertile void from which your authentic self can emerge. Eventually, you discover that your authentic self isn't a fixed identity at all. It's a way of being that's responsive to life rather than rigid, that expresses itself differently in different contexts, that continues to evolve and grow throughout your lifetime. You stop asking, "Who am I?" as if there's a definitive answer, and start living the question, allowing your authentic nature to reveal itself through how you respond to life, moment by moment. This is the ultimate freedom, not being anyone in particular, just being alive, awake, and responsive to whatever each moment brings. Chapter 6. The Myth of Closure. One of the most widespread misconceptions about emotional healing is the belief that you need closure to move forward. Closure has become a cultural obsession. This idea that you can't fully release a relationship, situation, or chapter of your life until you've had some definitive ending, some final conversation, some moment where everything gets resolved and tied up neatly. But this belief keeps countless people stuck, waiting for something that may never come and believing they can't move forward until they get it. The truth is, closure is a myth. Life rarely provides the neat resolutions we crave. People don't always apologize. Situations don't always get explained. Relationships don't always end with mutual understanding and compassion. Sometimes things just end, abruptly and messily, leaving you with questions that will never be answered and pain that was never acknowledged. And you have a choice. You can wait indefinitely for the closure that may never arrive, or you can learn to create your own sense of completion and move forward without it. The desire for closure usually masks several deeper needs. Sometimes it's actually a desire for validation. You want the other person to acknowledge the harm they caused, to confirm that your pain is legitimate, to admit they were wrong. Sometimes it's a desire for understanding. You want to know why something happened, what you did to deserve it, what you could have done differently. Sometimes it's a desire for revenge disguised as resolution. You want to confront the person who hurt you, make them feel bad, or at least make sure they know the impact of their actions. And sometimes it's a desire for control. You want to be the one who gets the last word, who shapes the narrative, who determines how the story ends. All of these desires are understandable, but none of them require the other person's participation. You can validate your own pain without needing someone else to acknowledge it. You can create your own understanding of what happened without needing their explanation. You can release your desire for revenge and find peace without ever confronting them. You can claim your own narrative and determine your own ending without their input. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you create for yourself by deciding that a chapter is complete, regardless of how it ended. Dr. Nancy Burns, a sociologist who has studied the concept of closure extensively, argues that our cultural obsession with closure actually interferes with healing. When you believe you need closure, to move forward. You remain oriented toward the past, focused on what hasn't been resolved rather than on the future you're creating. You're essentially allowing someone who hurt you to maintain power over your ability to heal by making your healing conditional on their participation. They don't even have to be present anymore to keep you stuck. Your belief that you need something from them is enough. The alternative to seeking closure is practicing what therapists call radical acceptance. This doesn't mean agreeing that what happened was okay or giving up on justice. It means accepting that what happened, happened, that it may never be explained or resolved, that you may never get the apology or acknowledgement you deserve, and that you're going to move forward anyway. You're choosing to stop waiting at the closed door and instead turn around and walk in a different direction. Radical acceptance is challenging because it requires grieving. When you accept that you're not going to get the closure you wanted, you have to grieve the loss of that hoped-for resolution. You have to feel the disappointment of not getting answers. You have to sit with the injustice of not being acknowledged. You have to release the fantasy of the perfect ending where everything gets explained and resolved. This grieving is painful, but it's also liberating because once you've grieved what you're not going to get, you're free to focus on what you can create. One powerful practice for creating your own closure is writing an unsent letter. You write everything you would say to the person if you could, all the hurt, anger, questions, and anything else you need to express. But you don't send it. The letter isn't for them. It's for you. It's a way of completing your side of the communication, of saying what needs to be said, of releasing what's been held inside. Once written, you can burn the letter, bury it, or simply keep it as a witness to your experience. The act of writing creates a sense of completion that doesn't require their participation. Another practice is creating a ritual of release. Rituals are powerful because they create a clear marker of transition, a moment where you consciously choose to close a chapter and begin a new one. Your ritual might involve gathering objects that represent the relationship or situation and either releasing them, transforming them, or putting them away. It might involve saying goodbye aloud to the person or situation, acknowledging what was gained and what was lost. It might involve making a symbolic gesture like releasing balloons, planting something new, or crossing a threshold to represent leaving the old behind. Creating your own closure also means actively choosing to tell a complete story about what happened rather than leaving it as an open narrative loop. Human brains are wired for narrative completion. We need stories to have beginnings, middles, and ends. When something ends without resolution, your brain keeps trying to complete the story, replaying it, analyzing it, looking for the ending. You can give your brain the completion it needs by consciously creating an ending to the story. Not a false or idealized ending, but an honest one that acknowledges this chapter is done, that you learned what you could from it, and that you're now beginning a new chapter. This conscious story completion might sound like, this relationship ended badly. I didn't get the closure I wanted. They never acknowledged how they hurt me. And I'm choosing to move forward anyway. I'm taking what I learned and leaving the rest behind. This chapter is complete. You're not waiting for them to close the chapter. You're closing it yourself by deciding it's done. This might feel artificial at first, but it works because closure was always an internal process anyway. You were never actually waiting for them to do something external. You were waiting for permission to move forward, and you're now giving yourself that permission. The belief that you need closure also often masks a fear of truly letting go. As long as you're waiting for closure, you have an excuse to maintain some connection, even if it's just a mental and emotional one. You can keep thinking about the person or situation, keep processing and analyzing, keep hoping for that final resolution. Letting go without closure means accepting that you may never think about this person or situation the same way again, that it will fade in importance, that eventually you might barely remember the details that once consumed you. For some people, this is terrifying because it feels like betraying the significance of what happened or the intensity of what they felt. But this fading is actually healing. The fact that something that once felt all-consuming gradually becomes a faded memory is evidence that you've genuinely released it. It's proof that you don't need it to remain vivid and important to continue living a full life. The most complete release is when you realize you haven't thought about the person or situation in weeks or months, when you can remember what happened without emotional charge, when you wish them well from a place of genuine indifference rather than forced forgiveness. This is what closure actually looks like. Not a dramatic final conversation, but a quiet fading into the past where it belongs. Chapter 7. Releasing the need to be right. Few things imprison people more thoroughly than the need to be right. This need shows up everywhere. In relationships, where you'd rather win an argument than maintain connection. In professional settings, where you defend your position long after new information has emerged. In personal beliefs, where you hold on to ideas that no longer serve you just because admitting you were wrong feels intolerable. The need to be right isn't actually about truth or accuracy. It's about ego protection, about maintaining an image of yourself as someone who doesn't make mistakes, whose judgment is sound, whose beliefs are correct. But this need costs you enormously. It prevents you from learning because you can't learn if you're defending your current understanding rather than staying open to new information. It damages your relationships because no one enjoys being around someone who always needs to be right and can't admit mistakes. It limits your growth because evolution requires releasing old beliefs and adopting new ones as you gain experience and wisdom. And it creates constant stress because reality doesn't actually care about your need to be right. It just keeps presenting you with evidence that contradicts your positions, forcing you into increasingly elaborate mental gymnastics to maintain your rightness. The need to be right typically develops as a protection against shame. If you grew up in an environment where mistakes were met with mockery, punishment, or withdrawal of love, you learned that being wrong is dangerous. Your young psyche concluded that the way to stay safe is to always be right, to defend your positions, to never admit error. This strategy made sense in that context, but it creates problems in adult life where being wrong is actually an essential part of learning, growing, and maintaining healthy relationships. People who are secure in themselves can admit when they're wrong without it threatening their sense of worth. They understand that being wrong about something doesn't mean they're fundamentally flawed as a person. It just means they were operating from incomplete information or faulty reasoning, which is a normal part of being human. They can say, "I was wrong," or "I don't know," or "I changed my mind," without experiencing shame because their worth isn't contingent on being infallible. Releasing the need to be right begins with separating your beliefs and positions from your identity. When you identify as your beliefs, challenging those beliefs feels like an attack on you personally. If someone disagrees with your political views, it feels like they're rejecting you. If new information contradicts your understanding, it feels like you're being proven inadequate. But your beliefs aren't you. They're tools you use to make sense of the world, and like any tools, they should be updated or replaced when they're no longer effective. One practice that helps release the need to be right is adopting what psychologists call intellectual humility. This is the recognition that your knowledge is always incomplete. Your perspective is always limited, and you could be wrong about almost anything. This doesn't mean becoming wishy-washy or abandoning your ability to form judgments. It means holding your beliefs with appropriate confidence while remaining open to revision when new evidence emerges. You can be confident in what you know while simultaneously acknowledging the limits of your knowledge. Another powerful shift is reframing what it means to be wrong. Instead of seeing it as failure or inadequacy, you can see it as growth. Every time you discover you were wrong about something, you're actually learning. You're updating your understanding to be more accurate. You're becoming wiser. The person who never admits they're wrong isn't someone who's always right. They're someone who's stopped learning. They've calcified around their current beliefs and cut themselves off from growth. The person who regularly discovers they were wrong is someone who's actively engaged with reality and willing to adjust their understanding accordingly. In relationships, releasing the need to be right transforms conflict entirely. Most arguments aren't actually about the stated topic. They're about who's right and who's wrong, who gets to be the authority, whose reality is valid. When you release the need to be right, you can enter conflict with curiosity instead of defensiveness. You can genuinely listen to the other person's perspective instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. You can acknowledge valid points they make, even while disagreeing with their conclusion. You can apologize when you've made a mistake without it feeling like you've lost something. This shift often requires explicitly telling your ego that it's okay to be wrong, that being wrong doesn't mean you're stupid or bad, that admitting error is actually a sign of strength rather than weakness. Your ego is trying to protect you from the shame it learned to associate with being wrong. You have to reassure it that the shame isn't warranted, that you're safe enough to acknowledge mistakes, that your worth doesn't depend on being infallible. This internal conversation might feel silly, but it's addressing the actual mechanism that drives the need to be right. Another aspect of releasing this need is developing comfort with uncertainty and not knowing. The need to be right often drives you to form firm opinions about things you don't actually understand well. You'd rather have a position, even a poorly informed one, than admit you don't know enough to have an opinion. But there's profound freedom in saying, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I need more information before forming a judgment. This honesty creates space for learning rather than defending. It invites genuine inquiry rather than rehearsing preformed conclusions. The need to be right also shows up in the stories you tell about your past, where you cast yourself as the hero or victim rather than acknowledging the complexity of most situations. You might have a narrative about a past relationship where your ex was entirely wrong and you were entirely innocent. This narrative protects your ego, but it also prevents you from learning anything useful from the relationship. Real growth requires acknowledging your part in what went wrong recognizing where your behavior contributed to problems, and taking responsibility for your choices even when you were also legitimately hurt by the other person. Releasing the need to be right in this context means being willing to see situations from multiple perspectives, including ones where you weren't the hero. This doesn't mean accepting false blame or taking responsibility for things that genuinely weren't your fault. It means acknowledging that most situations have complexity, that there are usually valid perspectives different from yours, and that you can acknowledge others' pain without it negating your own. The more secure you become, the less you need to construct narratives where you're always right and others are always wrong. Perhaps the most liberating aspect of releasing the need to be right is that it allows you to change your mind freely. When you're not attached to being right, you can adopt new beliefs as you learn new things without it feeling like you're betraying your former self. You can say, "I used to believe this, and now I believe that," without shame. You can acknowledge, "I didn't understand then what I understand now." This flexibility allows you to evolve continuously rather than remaining locked into positions you adopted years ago just because admitting you've changed would mean admitting you were wrong. The ultimate freedom is recognizing that being right is far less important than being connected, being curious, and being willing to grow. When you release the need to be right, you stop wasting energy on defending positions and start investing that energy in understanding more deeply, relating more genuinely, and evolving more rapidly. You discover that the relief of not having to be right all the time is far more valuable than the ego satisfaction of winning arguments. Chapter 8: The Financial Weight. Releasing Money. Anxiety. Money is one of the most emotionally charged topics for most people, wrapped up with identity, worth, security, and survival in ways that create enormous stress and anxiety. The weight of financial worry is crushing for millions, preventing them from sleeping peacefully, enjoying their lives, or making clear decisions. But much of this anxiety isn't actually about money. It's about what money represents, the meanings you've assigned to it, and the beliefs you hold about it that may have little to do with your actual financial reality. Your relationship with money was formed long before you earned your first dollar. You absorbed your family's money beliefs through osmosis, watching how your parents handled finances, listening to what they said about money, feeling the stress or ease that surrounded financial discussions. If your parents fought about money, you learned that money creates conflict. If they were constantly anxious about having enough, you internalized the belief that scarcity is the default state. If they used money to control or manipulate, you learned that money is a power weapon. If they never discussed it at all, you learn that money is shameful or too dangerous to address directly. These early imprints create your money scripts, unconscious beliefs about money that drive your financial behavior, often in ways that work against your stated goals. Common money scripts include beliefs like, "Money is the root of all evil," "Rich people are greedy," "I'll never have enough," "I don't deserve wealth," "Money corrupts," "I'm bad with money," or "I have to work incredibly hard for every dollar." These scripts operate below conscious awareness, sabotaging your financial success while you consciously claim you want financial security. The anxiety around money often isn't proportional to your actual financial situation. Some people with substantial savings feel constantly anxious about money, while others with very little feel relatively secure. The difference isn't usually their bank balance. It's their relationship with money, their beliefs about it, and the meanings they've assigned to financial success or struggle. If you believe that your worth as a person is determined by your net worth, you'll feel anxious about money regardless of how much you have, because there's always someone wealthier, always a possibility of losing what you've gained, always a fear that without money, you'll be worthless. Releasing financial anxiety begins with examining your money beliefs and questioning whether they're actually true or serving you. Take the belief, "I'll never have enough." Is this objectively true, or is it a fear-based prediction? What would enough even mean? Have you defined it, or is it a moving target that stays perpetually out of reach? Often people who believe they'll never have enough haven't actually calculated what they need to feel secure. They're comparing themselves to some imagined standard of wealth rather than defining their actual requirements. Another crucial step is separating your worth from your wealth. You are not your bank balance. Your value as a human being has nothing to do with how much money you have or don't have. You matter because you exist, not because of your financial status. This sounds obvious intellectually, but emotionally, most people have deeply internalized the equation that wealth equals worth. Unhooking this equation is essential for both reducing money anxiety and making better financial decisions, because when your worth isn't riding on every financial move, you can think more clearly. Financial anxiety also often stems from avoidance. Many people are anxious about money precisely because they won't look at their actual financial situation. They avoid checking their bank balance, don't track their spending, ignore debt, and refuse to create budgets because knowing the truth feels too overwhelming. But this avoidance actually creates more anxiety than facing reality would. The unknown is terrifying. The imagination fills the void with worst-case scenarios. When you actually look at your finances clearly, even if they're challenging, you at least know what you're dealing with and can start making informed decisions. Creating a realistic budget and tracking your spending isn't exciting, but it's one of the most anxiety-reducing things you can do. When you know exactly where your money goes, how much you have, and what you can afford, you stop the constant background worry about whether you can make a purchase or whether you're going to overdraft. You're making conscious choices rather than operating from fear and avoidance. This clarity itself is releasing because it converts vague anxiety into concrete information that you can work with. Another dimension of releasing financial anxiety is addressing scarcity mindset, the belief that there's never enough and that you must hoard, protect, and fight for every resource. Scarcity mindset creates a contracted, fearful relationship with money, where you're constantly in protection mode rather than growth mode. It prevents you from investing in yourself, taking calculated risks, or spending money on things that would actually improve your quality of life or earning potential, because you're terrified of not having enough. The alternative isn't reckless spending or ignoring practical financial concerns. It's abundance mindset, the belief that there are sufficient resources and that you can create value and attract money through your skills, creativity, and contribution. Abundance mindset allows you to invest in education that increases your earning potential, to take entrepreneurial risks that could multiply your income, to spend money on health and well-being that increase your capacity to earn, and to be generous in ways that often create unexpected returns. Developing abundance mindset doesn't mean pretending you have money you don't have or engaging in magical thinking. It means focusing on possibilities and opportunities rather than only on limitations and threats. It means asking, how can I create more value, rather than, how can I protect what I have? It means being willing to invest in your growth rather than only cutting expenses. It means recognizing that your ability to earn is ultimately based on the value you provide, not on scarcity of resources. Releasing money anxiety also involves forgiving yourself for past financial mistakes. Many people carry enormous guilt and shame about money decisions they made years ago, debt they accumulated, opportunities they missed, or ways they mismanaged their finances. This shame keeps you stuck because it reinforces the belief that you're bad with money, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But past mistakes don't determine your financial future unless you allow them to. Every day is an opportunity to make different choices, to learn from what didn't work, and to apply that learning going forward. Another powerful release is letting go of comparison. In a social media age where everyone presents curated highlight reels of their lives, it's easy to believe everyone else has their finances figured out while you're struggling. But this is an illusion. Most people are dealing with financial stress, uncertainty, or challenges even when they appear financially secure. Comparing your internal reality to others' external presentations is a recipe for feeling inadequate and anxious. Your financial journey is your own, with its own timeline, challenges, and victories. The only relevant comparison is to your own past, tracking whether you're making progress relative to where you were, not relative to where someone else is. Finally, releasing financial anxiety requires accepting that some level of uncertainty is inherent in financial life. You can't completely eliminate financial risk, no matter how much you save, plan, or prepare. Markets fluctuate. Jobs end. Unexpected expenses arise. Health issues happen. The goal isn't to create perfect financial security, which is impossible. The goal is to develop financial resilience, the capacity to handle financial challenges when they arise rather than prevent all challenges from ever occurring. This means building emergency funds, developing multiple income streams, continuously improving your skills, and cultivating the psychological flexibility to adapt when circumstances change. When you release the crushing weight of financial anxiety, money becomes what it actually is, a tool for facilitating the life you want rather than the determinant of your worth. You can make financial decisions from clarity rather than fear, from strategy rather than panic, from abundance rather than scarcity. You can enjoy what you have rather than constantly focusing on what you lack. You can be generous rather than always protecting and hoarding. And you can invest in your growth and well-being rather than sacrificing everything for some imagined future security that never quite feels secure enough. Chapter 9. Releasing Grudges and Resentment. Resentment is drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. This famous saying captures the fundamental truth about holding grudges. They hurt you far more than they hurt anyone else. The person you're resenting might not even know how you feel. They're living their life, mostly unaffected by your negative feelings toward them. Meanwhile, you're carrying their transgression like a stone in your pocket, pulling it out regularly to remember how they wronged you, rehearsing your anger, reinforcing your hurt. The weight of this grudge is entirely yours to bear. Most people hold on to grudges because they believe that releasing the resentment would mean letting the other person off the hook, agreeing that what they did was okay, or giving up on justice. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding. Releasing resentment isn't about the other person at all. It's about you and your well-being. It's about refusing to let someone who hurt you continue to hurt you by occupying space in your mind and heart. It's about reclaiming the energy you're spending on anger and redirecting it towards something that actually serves your life. Grudges often feel righteous. You were genuinely wronged. The person actually did something hurtful, unfair, or damaging. Your anger feels justified, and releasing it feels like betraying yourself or minimizing what happened. But justified anger and helpful anger aren't the same thing. You can be completely right about someone having wronged you, while simultaneously recognizing that continuing to carry resentment about it is damaging your well-being more than it's punishing them. The question isn't whether your anger is justified. The question is whether holding on to it is serving you. The mechanism that keeps grudges alive is rehearsal. You replay the transgression in your mind, remembering the details, feeling the hurt afresh, imagining what you should have said or done, fantasizing about revenge or vindication. Each rehearsal strengthens the neural pathways associated with the grudge, making it more automatic and intense. Your brain doesn't distinguish between remembering something and experiencing it fresh. Every time you replay the hurt, you're essentially experiencing it again, flooding your body with the same stress hormones, activating the same defensive responses, reinforcing the same patterns. Breaking this cycle requires first recognizing when you're rehearsing. Most people aren't even aware of how often they mentally return to old hurts. It happens automatically, triggered by something that reminds them of the person or situation, or sometimes seemingly out of nowhere. The first step is simply noticing, I'm rehearsing this grudge right now. I'm replaying this old hurt. This awareness creates a choice point where you can consciously decide whether to continue the rehearsal or redirect your attention. Redirecting attention isn't about suppressing the feelings or pretending you're not bothered. It's about recognizing that this particular mental activity isn't serving you and choosing to put your attention somewhere more productive. You might acknowledge, yes, that person hurt me, and I'm not going to spend my present moment reliving it. Then you actively shift your focus to something else, something happening right now, rather than something that happened in the past. This redirection takes practice because the groove of rehearsal is deep, but it gets easier with repetition. Another crucial aspect of releasing resentment is understanding that the person who hurt you was operating from their own limitations, wounds, and conditioning. This doesn't excuse their behavior or make it acceptable, but it contextualizes it in a way that often reduces your personalization of it. They didn't hurt you because you deserved it or because something is wrong with you. They hurt you because something is wrong with them, because they were acting from their own pain, fear, or dysfunction. When you see their behavior as a reflection of their brokenness rather than your unworthiness, the sting often lessens. This understanding can lead to what some people call compassion, though that word often creates resistance because it sounds like you're supposed to feel warmth towards someone who harmed you. Compassion, in this context, doesn't necessarily mean liking them or wanting them in your life. It means recognizing their humanity and limitations, seeing that hurt people, understanding that their capacity to harm you came from their own pain. This perspective shift can transform resentment into something closer to pity or indifference, both of which are far less burdensome to carry than active grudge holding. Some grudges are tied up with a desire for acknowledgement or apology that never came. The person never admitted what they did, never apologized, never even seemed to recognize the impact of their actions. This lack of acknowledgement can make the resentment feel permanent because you're waiting for something that may never happen. But your healing can't be contingent on their awareness or contrition. You have to find a way to validate your own experience, acknowledge your own pain, and move forward without needing them to participate in your healing process. One practice that helps is writing a letter to yourself from your own wise, compassionate self, acknowledging what you went through, validating your pain, and offering yourself the understanding and care you wanted from the person who hurt you. This self-witnessing can provide some of the validation you were seeking externally. You're essentially giving yourself what you needed from them, which is more reliable anyway, because you're always available to yourself in ways others may never be. Releasing resentment also sometimes requires grieving what you lost, or what should have been but wasn't. You might need to grieve the friendship that betrayed you, the parent who couldn't show up the way you needed, the partner who chose to leave, the opportunity that was taken from you. This grieving acknowledges that something real was lost, that you have every right to feel the pain of that loss, and that you're choosing to feel it fully so you can move through it rather than staying stuck in resentment about it. The ultimate release of resentment comes when you recognize that the best revenge is living well. The person who wronged you doesn't get to determine the quality of the rest of your life unless you give them that power by remaining consumed with resentment toward them. When you release the grudge and redirect that energy toward building a life you love, toward becoming who you're capable of being, toward creating meaning and joy despite what happened, you win in the most profound way possible. You refuse to let their bad behavior have lasting power over your well-being. This doesn't happen overnight. Deep resentments that have been carried for years don't dissolve with a single decision to let go. But every time you catch yourself rehearsing and choose to redirect, every time you remember to contextualize their behavior rather than personalize it, every time you validate yourself rather than waiting for their acknowledgement, you're weakening the hold of the resentment. Gradually, the grudge loses its intensity. The person fades in importance. The incident becomes just something that happened rather than a defining wound. And you discover that the freedom from resentment is worth far more than the satisfaction of holding the grudge ever was. Chapter 10. Your new life begins with release. Everything you've learned about release, from letting go of control to releasing toxic relationships, from dropping perfectionism to releasing grudges, culminates in a fundamental shift in how you relate to life itself. You move from grasping to flowing, from holding to releasing, from fighting reality to dancing with it. This shift isn't about becoming passive or not caring about anything. It's about distinguishing between what you can influence and what you can't, investing your energy wisely and refusing to carry weights that don't serve your growth or well-being. The power of release is cumulative. Each thing you let go makes the next release easier. Each weight you put down makes you more aware of other weights you've been carrying unnecessarily. Each time you choose release over clinging, you strengthen your capacity for release in other areas. You're literally retraining your nervous system to default to release rather than to grasping, to flow rather than to control, to trust rather than to fear. This retraining takes time and repeated practice, but the compound effects are profound. Living from a foundation of release transforms your daily experience in practical ways. You sleep better because you're not carrying the day's worries into bed with you. You're more present in conversations because you're not mentally rehearsing old arguments or future conflicts. You make better decisions because they're based on current reality rather than on past hurts or future fears. You have more energy because you're not exhausting yourself trying to control things that aren't yours to control. You experience more joy because you're not dampening positive emotions through worry about when they'll end. The practice of release also changes how you approach new challenges. Instead of immediately grasping for control when something difficult arises, you can ask yourself what needs to be released to make space for a response. Maybe you need to release your expectation of how this should go. Maybe you need to release your need to handle it perfectly. Maybe you need to release your attachment to a specific outcome and remain open to unexpected solutions. This question, what do I need to release, becomes a powerful navigation tool that helps you move through difficulties with more grace and less struggle. Release also creates space for what wants to emerge in your life. When your hands are full of things you're desperately clutching, there's no room to receive new opportunities, relationships, or possibilities. But when you open your hands and release what's no longer serving you, you create space. New connections can form. Different opportunities can appear. Aspects of yourself that were suppressed can emerge. Life can surprise you in ways it couldn't when you were too busy holding on to the familiar to notice what else might be available. This isn't magical thinking or the law of attraction. It's practical reality. When you're consumed with resentment toward an ex, you're not emotionally available for new relationships. When you're obsessed with controlling a situation at work, you're not open to alternative approaches that might work better. When you're carrying the identity of someone who failed, you're not pursuing opportunities where you might succeed. Release creates openness, and openness allows life to flow in new directions. The ultimate release is the release of your resistance to life itself. Most suffering comes not from difficult circumstances, but from your resistance to those circumstances, from wanting reality to be different than it is. When you stop fighting what is and start working with what is, everything changes. This doesn't mean you stop trying to improve situations or create change. It means you start from acceptance of what's actually true, rather than from denial of reality. And paradoxically, this acceptance often allows you to be more effective at creating change than your resistance ever was. Living from release also means accepting that you will continue to accumulate new weights, face new challenges, and encounter new things that you'll eventually need to let go of. This is the human condition. The practice of release isn't something you complete and then you're done. It's an ongoing practice of noticing what you're holding, questioning whether it serves you, and choosing to put down what doesn't. It's a way of being rather than a destination you reach. The invitation now is to begin, not perfectly, not all at once, but to simply start noticing what you're carrying that no longer serves you and consciously choosing to put it down. Maybe you start with something small, a minor grudge, a perfectionist standard in one area, an outdated identity you've been maintaining. You practice release in this small way and notice how it feels. You discover that the world doesn't end when you let go. In fact, your world often improves. From this small beginning, you expand. You release more, notice more, create more space. You become skilled at distinguishing between what's yours to carry and what's not. You develop confidence in your capacity to release even things that feel essential, discovering that you're actually more capable and resilient without them than you were while carrying them. You become someone who travels light through life, unburdened by unnecessary weight, free to respond to each moment freshly, rather than through the accumulated baggage of the past. This is the power of release. Not a single, dramatic transformation, but a gradual lightening, a progressive freedom, a growing capacity to be present with what is, rather than imprisoned by what was, or anxious about what might be. Your life begins new in each moment when you're not dragging the past into it, not forcing the future to look a specific way. Simply here, available, responsive, and free. This freedom is your birthright. It's always been available. You just needed to understand that the bars of your cage were things you were holding on to, not external circumstances holding you. The moment you open your hands and release your grip, you discover you were always free. You just needed to let go.